everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Very Cold Lasagna podcast, your filthy casual place for all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. I am DylanLasagna. Welcome to episode number 134 on this icy yet spicy podcast for the casual fan like you and me. Today, it's another day of season recaps. We are in the second half of our season recap month, and perhaps the hardest half of season recaps. Why is it the hardest second half of season recap month? Well, that's because free agency, the new league year, is in full swing. What do I mean by the new league year? For those of you that aren't so aware or don't keep up with the NFL news this time of year, well, that basically means it's like when the new year started back in January. That's basically what the NFL is. They rang in the new year, and it's a fresh start for the NFL. Not technically the NFL season with new games, but in terms of players that are no longer binded to their written contracts to teams, so they can choose to stay or go to another team. So that being said, that's what has been going on the last time I sat down in this chair, whether you're listening to me or watching me. So that's what we're here to talk about here on this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. So we got a lot to talk about on the last time I was here in this chair. We have to catch up on free agency, and we have 6 more teams on the docket with our season recap month. Part 4, part cuatro, ladies and gentlemen. So a little bit of housekeeping first before we catch up on free agency. Obviously, we have a lot more to cover with our final set of teams in season recap month with part 5 and part 6. So stay tuned for that. And I'm kind of conjuring up a little bit some video ideas for the YouTube channel because I have a little bit ideas on the top of my head. Just not sure if I want to execute them because there's just so much to catch up on with these teams and free agency. It's like a lot, but hopefully I can. So we'll see. We shall see. I can't guarantee anything. But regardless, stay tuned to the Very Cold Lasagna podcast, the YouTube channel, and wherever you get your podcast, whether it's on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and apparently now Spotify for podcasters. That's another thing. I got to change the link to that. And the social media, whether it's on Twitter or Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. And make sure to leave a review, a comment, a like. I've been seeing a lot of comments on the clips for each and every team that has been getting comments on the season recaps, like the Patriots, I think it was the Jets. No, not the Jets, the Packers, or I forgot which one it was. But you guys have been leaving feedback on some of my most recent videos on YouTube. I really appreciate the feedback, whether it's positive, negative, constructive. I really appreciate it. It really means the world to me, and helps me like be positive, like, and improves my content in some sort of way. Regardless, it always helps when feedback is appreciative or constructive or any kind of manner. So make sure to do all the good things and whatever you want to do in regards to Very Cold Lasagna. All right. So moving on to our main points of today, and that is, of course, catching up on the teams that I talked about previously and how I mentioned in the part 3 of our season recaps that we were not going to be talking about anything in regards to free agency with the 6 teams. Those teams were the Jets, the Patriots, the Packers, the Commanders, the Steelers, and the Lions. That's because it was on the verge of free agency, and, well, they didn't really make that many moves quite yet because they couldn't legally. So we're here to catch up on what exactly those 6 teams did in part 3 of our season recap since then, and what I think of them, and whether you're a fan of them or not, should think of them. So starting with the New York Jets, obviously the big move, the big move that everyone's talking about, or the big thing that everyone's talking about, is this actually relates to both the New York Jets and the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers is making his intentions well known that he wants to go from the Packers to the New York Jets. So there you go. No surprise there. So he's following the footsteps of his mentor in in 2008, Brett Favre. So honestly, I don't really understand why Aaron Rodgers wants to do this now. He wants to go to the New York Jets now. But I guess, yeah, like I said, he wants to follow in the footsteps of Brett Favre when he was winding down his career, go from Green Bay to the Jets. It really is like that situation 2.0. So we shall see. We'll see what the compensation will be. They're still trying to decide that. I guess the holdup is like a first round pick, trying to decide how many first round picks it's going to be. Right away, Aaron Rodgers, really? That's what your decision came to be after that whole darkness retreat and anything? I mean, if he wants to play that badly, sure, be my guess. But, I mean, he should have just retired. Really should have just retired. But on the other side of things, for the Jets, at least they re-signed linebacker Quincy Williams on a 3-year deal, so that's good. A key piece of the puzzle for that really strong Jets defense last year. And potentially they got a little bit even stronger with a trade for Ravens safety Chuck Clark on a 7th-round pick. Not too bad. So the Jets defense, pretty held up pretty well. And it's going to continue to hold up as long as, the offense, they make the changes. We'll see what happens with the whole Aaron Rodgers situation. As for the New England Patriots, they got some key additions to the offense, like getting a potentially top receiver, maybe, with Juju Schuster from the Chiefs, as well as getting a running back in James Robinson from the Jets. And they re-signed, on the defensive side, corner Jonathan Jones on a 2-year deal. So, I mean, not a bad free agency so far for the New England Patriots. But let's see what they do the rest of the way with the draft. For the Washington Commanders, they re-signed defensive lineman Jerron Payne and center Tyler Larson. So, I mean, a little bit of an overpay, though, for Jerron Payne. It was like 4 years, $90 million. Like, oof, that's a lot for a defensive lineman. But, I mean, he has been a key piece to their pass rush. Center Tyler Larson, pretty solid, pretty decent center for the Commanders. But they should invest a little bit more in the offensive line, which they did. They signed offensive tackle Andrew Wiley. I mean, pretty solid tackle for the Chiefs in that Super Bowl run. And former Browns backup quarterback Jacoby Brissett, who's going to be competing with, if the Commanders at least try to make a move on a quarterback. I don't know where. I don't know when in the draft. But we'll see. Either way, if they don't, then it's going to be a competition between him and Sam Howell, like a wolf. As for the Pittsburgh Steelers, they re-signed defensive lineman Larry Ogunjobi. So a solid depth piece for the Steelers. They also signed linebackers Cole Holcomb and Landon Roberts. So they get some decent pieces to cover the field where their secondary was And they also signed former Vikings corner Patrick Peterson. So as long as he's not asked to do too much, like he did with the Minnesota Vikings last year with that very atrocious defense, the Steelers should be okay. For the Detroit Lions, though, they made perhaps a lot of big moves out of all these 6 teams. And look out, man. Look out. Like I said, these Detroit Lions could be scary. Because they signed corners Cameron Sutton, formerly the Steelers, and perhaps Emmanuel Mosley, coming off that torn ACL week 5 against the Panthers. And once he's fully healthy, watch out, ladies and gentlemen. Look out. They got some pretty good signs in the cornerback market. And they continue to re-sign some of their key pieces, even though, they didn't do that all that great, like Isaiah Buggs, John Comiskey, and Alex Alzone. I mean, okay, that's fine. And they signed former Bears running back David Montgomery after they lost Jamal Williams to the Saints. So for the Lions, I mean, pretty good start, especially in the defensive end, getting their secondary settled in with Cameron Sutton and Emmanuel Mosley. So pretty good for them. So that's a little bit of a catch-up on those 6 teams from part 3 and where they stand in free agents after free agency, at least right now. So moving on to some of the key moves around the league in free agency, and there definitely were a lot that happened. So obviously, I'm not going to be talking about every single big move that happened just the ones that really stood out to me. One of the big moves that stood out to me, though, obviously the one that happened like well before, well, actually well after I posted the clip of the New Orleans Saints season recap, was, well, Derek Carr. Yeah, former Las Vegas Raiders quarterback Derek Carr signing a 4-year, $150 million deal to go to the New Orleans Saints. I mean, it was no secret after he went to visit New Orleans for like I think it was like a workout or a session. I mean, no surprise there. So, I mean, like I said, I mean, not really much of a difference because Derek Carr was pretty mid in 2022, and even with it was pretty good 2021. I mean, 1 year out of what, 10? Not good. Josh Jacobs was franchise tagged by the Raiders, so yeah, we'll see how he does in another prove it year for him. And speaking of the Raiders, to counteract Derek Carr leaving them, they signed another Derek Carr-esque quarterback in, well, Jimmy Garoppolo, to a 3-year, $72 million deal. Like, well then. Now, obviously, when you sign Jimmy G to this type of deal, when you look at it in fairness, it seems like the Raiders are still in that quarterback market. They're still in that playing field for a quarterback in the draft potentially. Now, the problem is, though, there are 4 other teams in that draft. I think it's the Panthers, the Texans, the Colts, and I think it's potentially somebody else. I totally forgot who it was. That is in that top 5 or 6. Oh, the Lions. Potentially the Lions. That could just grab the top 4 quarterbacks in this draft. So by the time you get to the Raiders at 7, it's like, which quarterback do they get? Which one are they going to get? Unless if the Lions don't pick the last remaining best quarterback prospect in that first round. So it's like, now you're stuck with Jimmy Garoppolo. Devontae Adams is stuck with Jimmy Garoppolo. Hunter Renfrow stuck with Jimmy G. Like, did they not see what Jimmy G, how limited he was and how limiting that offense was with the 49ers in those 5 years, except for 2017? Like, come on, man. This is the best the Raiders could do. But then, I don't know. Then again, this is what I expected. This is what Josh McDaniels expected, right? A reunion with Jimmy G. Have fun with Jimmy Garbage fail, everyone, down in Sin City. But hey, they can prove me wrong, though. They can definitely prove me wrong. The Raiders continue to have some ham in free agency, though, because they signed former Patriots receiver Jacoby Myers on a 3-year deal. So at least, you backload the offense. Now you have at least Jimmy G, Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Jacoby Myers, a good crop of receiving talent. So you gotta give credit where credit's due there. The problem is, though, you gave away your top tight end option because the Raiders traded away Darren Waller to the New York Giants, and they didn't really get much in return. A 3rd-round pick, that's the best you can do? Yikes, man. But hey, Daniel Jones, who just got re-signed by the Giants, by the way, to a big fat extension. I don't know why the Giants did that. So, at least for Daniel Jones, he gets a good tight end option in Darren Waller, given that he stays healthy. And for the Bengals, they signed offensive tackle for the Chiefs, Orlando Brown Jr., to a 4-year big fat deal. So the offensive line for Cincinnati is going to be really continue to stay strong, given that they stay healthy, no injuries late in the season. But to counteract that, the Chiefs signed former Titans offensive tackle Jawan Taylor to a 4-year big fat deal. So the Chiefs offensive line is already found his replacement. For my 49ers, their pass rush, they encountered some losses in free agency, like Charles Omenihu, Samson Ebukam. But prior to that, they made a big splash deal to power up their interior defensive line and went out and got Eagles defensive tackle Javon Hargrave to a big fat deal. So that pass rush is going to be pretty intense, like at least right now, with Eric Armstead, Javon Hargrave in the interior, and then Nick Bosa, as long as you get that big back extension settled in, and Drake Jackson, I'm really expecting big things out of him in his second year. That's a scary-ass pass rush right there, ladies and gentlemen, and should definitely help the secondary. And then, last but not least, the Bears signing former Bills linebacker Tremaine Edmonds to a 4-year, $72 million deal. A little bit of an overpay, but should help the Bears defense in some way, in some form. So those are your key big free agent moves so far in the start of the new league year for the NFL. What were your big moves that you thought were like crazy so far? What were some of the moves that I personally missed? Let me know. What were some of the big moves that I missed but stood out to you? I would like to know your thoughts in any way, shape, or form. So that being said, we talked about free agency enough. Now, let's move on to our NFL season recap month. Continuing on with the second half, part 4. We now move on to the playoff teams that just couldn't get it done. That were one and done in the playoffs. We already wrapped up the first half with the teams that were sucky, were so bad, and were almost is never enough. Those teams that just couldn't grab that brass ring. But now we're going to encounter the teams, all the playoff teams that were just short of that Super Bowl brass ring. So we begin the second half of our 2022 NFL season recaps. And we begin with part 4. The wild card teams that were one and done. The teams that just couldn't get it done in the first round were reasons that are to be told. And we begin by jumping on the ship that just crumbled, came crashing down when it burns inside, brother. And that is, of course, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers down in the South. And I gotta say about the Tampa Bay Bucks, they had one of the most weird off seasons that I could remember last year. They lost in the divisional playoffs against the eventual Super Bowl champions, the LA Rams. They failed to defend their Super Bowl title. And a couple weeks later, Tom Brady announced his retirement just like that. But then he went on to retract it like literally a month later. And then a couple weeks later or a month later, Bruce Arians retired as head coach and then took on a senior advisor role in the organization. And he gave his former role of head coach to his defensive coordinator, Todd Bowles. So it's slowly but surely creeping up as the winds of change. Even though Tom Brady was technically still there, and you still had at least most of the Super Bowl roster from 2020 still under contract, but questions remained about whether Tom Brady would regret unretiring, coming back for, what was his 23rd season. He was 45. But there were a lot of questions about whether or not the inevitable would happen for what some people are going to argue was the GOAT of football. And, initially, it didn't feel that way of regret as the Bucs started out 2-0. They looked relatively okay against the Cowboys and the New Orleans Saints. But you notice from then on out, they started to look noticeably worrisome. They started trending downward rapidly. They lost their next 5 or 6 games. Sure, you could say injuries happened. They lost the likes of Chris Godwin, Jamal Dean, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Shaquille Barrett to either multi-week or, in the case of Shaquille Barrett, their top linebacker, season-ending injuries. That definitely didn't help the Tampa Bay Bucs. But they were playing really bad football on both sides of the ball. The defense had a lot of trouble rushing the passer, even when Shaq Barrett was there, even when Lavonte David is there. But they just couldn't rush the passer. They couldn't get to quarterbacks. They even had more trouble doing so when they lost Shaq Barrett for the season with the ACL injury in Week 8. The Bucs secondary was nearly one of the worst in the league because they were very prone to letting small plays developing into big ones, and they left receivers too wide open very often. Perhaps the biggest problem for Tampa Bay was it looked like fodder time had come to collect Tom Brady. It looked like the inevitable, like I mentioned earlier, came to collect. Yeah, an offensive line that lacked Ryan Jensen for all the season didn't help. And they had a lot of offensive line combos. Didn't help. It seemed like Tom Brady looked completely lost. He was underthrowing and overthrowing his options at receiver while throwing more and more interceptions than he normally would. And the running game also didn't help matters. Leonard Fournette didn't have a great season. And his backup options, and I think it was Rashad White, or I can't remember the name, but the backup options behind Leonard Fournette weren't exactly inspiring either. Sure, they had their flashes of their past season success, but for every win that they had, especially late in the season, they reverted back to their bad forms, their bad habits. Just look at the 4-game stretch from week 10 to week 14, where they had a good win, where they showed their flashes of their good selves from the past. And then the next game, they were looking really bad on offense, where they would lose to teams like the Skid Marks, the Browns, and then they win against the Saints. And then the next week after, they were getting their asses whooped by the 49ers by a third-string quarterback, Brock Purdy. But because they were playing in a putrid NFC South where every team was just as bad as they were, and the division race was literally that tight, and at one point, they lost a division lead to the Atlanta Falcons. Yes, it was that bad. Everyone in that division had a losing record, including them. They still won the division in a Week 17 game against the Panthers in what was another showcase of what they could have been offensively. They were in a comeback win. But it was all a waste, though, because the next thing you know, their ship was sunk by the Dallas Cowboys in a Monday Night Wildcard game where their flaws were majorly exposed yet again. So, overall, not exactly a good season for the Tampa Bay Bucks, especially what turned out to be Tom Brady's final season. Going 8-9, Brady, sure, he was not okay, but not exactly that level of great. It certainly didn't help that it seemed like Father Time definitely did come to collect Brady. So now they enter an offseason of change because Tom Brady did exactly what he did a year before. He went on to retire. And it seems as of right now, it looks to stay that way permanently for good. So they enter an offseason moving on without their Super Bowl winning quarterback. And they were initially like in cap hell. They were initially dead in the water. Like their ship had really sunk down. They initially started around $55 million, which is really bad in money. So they weren't initially before free agency started, they weren't able to spend anything at all. But at least they got to a point where they were able to spend. Like as I'm recording this, they're like at least $1 million under the cap or in the green. Some of their key free agents include Lavonte David and Anthony Nelson. They were able to re-sign back Lavonte David. Corners, Jamal Dean and Sean Murphy Bunting. Strong safeties, Logan Ryan, Mike Edwards. Free safeties, Keanu Neal. Defensive ends, Akeem Hicks and William Golston. And receivers, Julio Jones and Scotty Miller. Obviously, a lot of big free agents on the defensive side of the ball, which was key in that Super Bowl victory against the Kansas City Chiefs 2 years ago. So it was going to be impossible to sign and re-sign just about everybody. Fortunately for the Bucks, a little bit of releases and restructures of contracts allowed them to at least keep a little bit of those pieces, like re-sign Jamal Dean to a 4-year deal, restructuring the contracts of Carlton Davis, center Ryan Jensen, Chris Godwin, and defensive tackle Vita Vea. So pretty much they're backloading the deals into later years. They released tight end Cameron Brate and lineman Donovan Smith and their top running back Leonard Fournette. They also managed to re-sign Lavonte David, but they also traded away guard Shaq Mason to the Texans for a 7th-round pick. So for the Bucks, they're clearly entering a rebuilding phase. They're entering a transitionary period. So they still have a lot to address. They did get a quarterback to compete with Kyle Trask and Baker Mayfield, but this is Baker Mayfield's 4th team in 3 years? not even 3 years, maybe like even the last year or so. Yeah, he was on the Panthers, he was on the Rams, and now he's on the Bucks. So actually the third team in the last year or so. Not exactly a good track record for the former number one overall pick. So he's on a prove it deal. So let's see if he can win the starting job, or maybe the Bucks try and go the late second round pick route again and get another quarterback to compete with them. I don't know. So the Bucks still have some things to figure out, especially at the running back position, because they did release Leonard Fournette. They got to find a quality running back in the draft. So otherwise, that running game is going to be very stagnant again. And they got to find another corner to replace Sean Murphy-Bunting. Sure, they got Carlton Davis and what was his name? Jamal Dean back. But, Sean Murphy-Bunting was very key to that defense still. And you can't exactly go freaking naked in the secondary without a third cornerback. So you also want to fix the interior of the offensive line. They already traded away Shaq Mason to the Texans. And it's already bad enough that they were struggling to protect Brady last season, even when most of the starters came back. So they should find some linemen in the draft to compete with the current ones for the starting spot. So certainly a very disappointing 2022 for Bucs fans, and especially with the way they went out in that wildcard game against the Cowboys. Yeah, a blowout loss to end Brady's career. And it certainly is not going to get any better for them. Brady retired for good. They're entering this phase back to, I don't want to say irrelevancy, but back to reality for them. When you have the Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask compete for the starting spot, and pretty much not a lot of pieces on defense. But I mean, hey, you at least got two good years of playoff success and a Super Bowl title to show for it. So Bucs fans, hey, you can keep your head up high, and you got something to be proud of. So, hey, raise the flag, I guess. So now we go from the sunken ship in Tampa to the Emerald City and talk about the Seattle Seahawks. So when I talked about the Seahawks back in July with my season previews, they look destined towards rebuilding in 2022. They traded away their longtime starter, Russell Wilson, to the Broncos for a massive package that included 2 first-round picks and a bevy of players. One of those players was competing for the starting job in Drew Lock. But Pete Carroll turned to former first-round pick, turned backup Geno Smith, who was already on the team. So most people expected Seattle to win about 5 games minimum, one of those people being me, because honestly, they didn't really have much to offer other than DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and not a whole lot of pieces on defense. So it seemed that way when the season came around. It seemed that way despite getting some payback on, ironically, their first game of the season, winning against Russell Wilson and the Broncos. They lost their next 2 games in not really good fashion against the 49ers and the Falcons, starting the season 1-2. But they started playing much better after that. They won their next 5 or 6 games because of how much smoother the offense would naturally end up being. Geno Smith suddenly found a stride in limiting his mistakes and finding the right balance between taking the check down and taking the deep shot passes. He was playing really effectively, very surprisingly. And as a result, the receiving game of Metcalf and Lockett became a threatening duo. And it also helped that the emergence of running back rookie Kenneth Walker III also helped balance out the rest of the offense as well and take some of that pressure off of Geno Smith. Not to say that Kenneth Walker will be the next Marshawn Lynch or anything, but he looked like a really effective running back. But the problem was, for as well as the offense did in that good stretch of that 5 of 6 game stretch, their defense undid a good part of that good stretch in the second half of the season. The rest of the way, they endured a 3 of 5 stretch to end their regular season. It was a defense that still had problems of the past. A run defense that was one of the worst in the league. They really couldn't stop opposing running backs, whether it was on first downs or getting big chunk runs. A big example was that overtime loss to the Raiders, where they just allowed Josh Jacobs to just run butt naked to the end zone to lose the game. And there wasn't much pass rush support other than Shelby Harris. And the secondary, that got torched yet again, despite some decent play out of their rookie, Kobe Bryant. Not the basketball player, though. For Seattle, at least, though, they still managed to clinch the last NFC wildcard spot thanks to some help from the Detroit Lions, who, ironically, they eliminated due to tiebreakers and stuff. But, unfortunately, they almost kept it close against the 49ers in their first round matchup, but they eventually ran out of steam and got run out of the building. Regardless, though, they were a big surprise team in 2022. They went 9-8, had some success to the surprise of many people. And even if they are my team's division rival, I can give them credit where credit is due. They have some players on both ends that look, but I can do pretty well. Like Kenneth Walker III, corners Kobe Bryant and Tariq Woolen, tackle Abram Lucas, who can be a key part of that offensive line. And I can't be too sure about the long-term viability of Geno Smith, but he can be a good mentor. I do believe he could be a good stopgap and veteran mentor for whoever will be the long-term option for the Seattle Seahawks. They may not be too dead after all, but we'll see. We'll see what happens in 2023. So when you look at their offseason so far, they started out with $21 million in cap space. Some of their key unrestricted free agents, fortunately, they didn't have too many of them. Strong safety Jonathan Abram, linebacker Cody Barton, center Kyle Fuller. Some of the offseason moves that they already made, obviously the biggest one being they re-signed Geno Smith to a 3-year contract. So whether he's going to be the starting quarterback, probably he will be, or the Seahawks still go out and get a quarterback, probably I imagine in the second or third round. We shall see. But at least for Seattle, they have a starting quarterback for the foreseeable future. We'll see how it pans out. They also got some help in the pass rush by signing defensive tackle Jaron Reed, and some help on the offensive line by re-signing guard Phil Haynes. They also got some big help in signing defensive tackle Draymond Jones, but they did, as a result, have to release Quinn Jefferson and Shelby Harris on the defensive tackle. Kind of a questionable releasing of Shelby Harris, though. But they did lose linebacker Cody Barton to the Commanders, so they do have to get some help there. So when you have to look at the Seahawks, what else they have to do this offseason, obviously they have to get some help behind Draymond Jones because, like I said, they released Quinn Jefferson and Shelby Harris. You still have to find some help in the interior pass rush, and actually the pass rush as a whole, because outside of Draymond Jones and Jaron Reed, it's like, what else do you have? What else do you have in the pass rush? Sure, you have a chance to stop the run a little bit better now, but it's like, what about on the outside? How are you going to get to the quarterback outside the trenches? You got to find a way to do that. They can also certainly use some help at the center position to further strengthen that offensive line. And hey, I forgot about this. They have the 5th overall pick from the Denver Broncos. So certainly not out of the realm of possibility for Seattle to go and get and steal from, I think it's the Lions who have the 6th pick. I keep going back and forth on this. So it's not out of the realm of the possibility for the Seahawks to go and get the quarterback that they potentially could get in this draft. Because Geno Smith, again, I think he said in his presser, like, he doesn't mind if he's the starter or he's the mentor. He wants to help out any way he can. But we'll see. Maybe Seattle should consider using that 5th overall pick to go and grab the best remaining quarterback prospect left. If it's there, go get him. If they like it so much. If not, then maybe go get what they need at that spot. So Seattle definitely, at least right now, they won the Russell Wilson trade in 2022. They put the thought of a rebuild out the window for now. They could potentially continue to do so if they better address the defense for once, which so far they kind of did, and perhaps consider getting a young quarterback to sit and be mentored behind Geno Smith. They have that opportunity with the 5th overall pick. So the 49ers may be the kingpin of the NFC West, at least for right now, for the time being. But let's see what Seattle does, this offseason. I mean, it's not guaranteed that, they're going to overtake the 49ers. And it's not me saying that because I'm a Niners fan. But objectively speaking, let's see what Seattle can do this offseason. Let's see what moves they can make. See if they can give the Niners a little scare. So we're now going from the Emerald City of Seattle back down to Florida in the Miami Gardens to talk about, of course, none other than the Miami Dolphins. So the Miami Dolphins, for all the things that they've done in the last offseason and last year, they seem like the clear team to truly challenge the Buffalo Bills in the AFC East division because what they did last year in the offseason, getting an offensive-minded head coach in Mike McDaniel, who was the coordinator and being met in one part of the Kyle Shanahan head coaching tree, retooling the offensive line, getting good running backs if you're the Dolphins, and perhaps their biggest move last year in that offseason, trading a lot of draft capital to go and get a deadly weapon behind Jalen Waddle and especially for Tua Tagovailoa, Tyreek Hill from the Kansas City Chiefs. So you had a loaded offense with Tua, Tyreek, Jalen Waddle, Mike Gesicki, and a running back in Raheem Mostert. But even with all that, obviously the biggest question remained: would Tua Tagovailoa in his third year, would he be able to take advantage of all that talent around him and be that dude? Can he take that big leap and overtake the Bills, or at least make the playoffs with that Dolphins team? And at least in the first couple weeks of the season, it certainly looked that way, especially with Mike McDaniel's coaching. Compared to Brian Flores' coaching, Tua certainly looked more like a more focused and more poised quarterback, which especially helps when he had an offense loaded with those names already mentioned and a better offensive line. The team got off to a pretty good 3-0 start, including a really big comeback win on the road against the Baltimore Ravens, where they were down 24 points, and then they outlasted the Bills in a slugfest. But here's the big B-U-T, not the double T. That game against the Bills is where things start to slowly sour for Miami. That's because Tua got concussed in the second quarter, being wobbly, and then he had to get taken to the back for concussion protocol. And then all of a sudden, he came back in. Like, he was fine. And that's where the things started to really get questionable. Like, how was he okay? Like, after he just got hit, was wobbly, and all that. And then things got really questionable when the Dolphins had a short turnaround for a Thursday night game in Cincinnati, where they had to travel for that game. He still played, and when he took a hard sack and hit his head on the turf, he was, I don't want to say it, he was seriously hurt. He was concussed again. I don't like talking about that concussion situation because, very sensitive subject. But whether it was he wanted to play or whether he was cleared or not, the Dolphins were stupid. The Dolphins were very irresponsible to let him go out and play when it looked like he still clearly had concussion symptoms. Like, they did not need him to trot out there just to protect their undefeated record, just to keep the offensive momentum going, or whatever their intentions were. It was still very irresponsible. Yes, looking back at it, what was it? 6 months ago? It was still a very irresponsible move to have him go out there, went on a very short turnaround, to have him play like that. So they finally let him rest because it got that serious. And then when he came back, he helped the Dolphins win 5 straight games. They were 8-3. It looked like they were well on their way to potentially clinching the AFC East division title because they were that hot and the Bills were getting that cold. at the end of November, they were, like I said, 8-3, but then things started to spiral down because Tua's play started regressing. He started turning the ball over more frequently. The whole team as a whole, they started playing more sloppy. The defense was allowing more big plays. And then on Christmas Day against the Packers, Tua got concussed for a third time. Yeah, not good at all, man. It was not good. 3 concussions in a season. Ouch. So they did clinch a playoff spot in the season finale against the Jets, but they had to play their wild card game on the road against the Bills without Tua. They still managed to cut it close and nearly pull it away with their third string quarterback, Skylar Thompson. Yeah, at one point they managed to take the lead and they were like over 6 minutes away from beating the Bills, a Super Bowl favorite, mind you. And the Bills were giving that game away to them. But back clock management from Mike McDaniel, and of course, when you're starting your third string quarterback and Skylar Thompson, the limitations were eventually going to catch up to them. And that allowed the Bills to come back, win it, and eliminate the Dolphins in that first round matchup. So overall, when you look back at this 9-8 season for Miami, it's a little hard to exactly judge what it could have been. Because obviously, when you look at the stretches where Tua played, yeah, the December games were not great. He did not play well. But when you look at the earlier stretches where he played, he looked like a pretty good quarterback. Especially when you have receivers like Jay Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Mike Gesicki, even though he wasn't involved that well because obviously you have 2 really good receivers in Waddle and Hill, and a running back tandem of Raheem Mostert, and then later in the season, Jeff Wilson Jr. So when you have a fast, efficient offense like that, Tua was performing really well. It's just the problem is, like, you had a lot of what ifs because of the whole Tua concussion issue. And I still condemn Miami for how they handled it. But the important thing is Tua is alive and well. And now it's on Tua to stay healthy and for Miami to keep him healthy this coming fall if they want to regain that proper chance of competing in the AFC East and potentially downing the Bills in that division. So when you look at this offseason so far for the Dolphins, they had around $13 million to start spending. Some of their key free agents before free agency started were punter Thomas Morstead, defensive ends Melvin Ingram and Trey Flowers, running backs Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr., tight end Mike Gesicki, and backup quarterback Teddy Bridgewater. So they did lose Mike Gesicki to the Patriots, but perhaps their biggest move so far was trading for Rams corner Jalen Ramsey. So their secondary definitely got better because the Rams are sorely missing someone opposite Xavier Howard. So having Ramsey opposite Howard is definitely going to help the secondary when Ramsey is a lockdown corner. So in turn, they did release Byron Jones and designate as a post-June 1st cut. They did manage to re-sign running backs Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. to cheap deals. So that's good for them. A good, solid running back to end them. They got a new backup quarterback in Mike White from the Jets. So Mike White's not going that far in terms of like distance and staying in the division. They did get a good linebacker in David Long of the Titans and a potential starting safety, Deshaun Elliott. So overall, it's been a pretty good, productive offseason so far for the Dolphins as they try to rectify that pretty disappointing end to 2022. So obviously, some of the things they still have to address is upgrading that offensive line for Tua, at least gain some depth. The guard center spots were eh. So they still need some help there. And they could definitely stand to get some depth behind Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips because that pass rush, there are still some things to be desired there. So Miami, they've done a pretty good job so far in addressing the defensive side of the ball. Now their focus should be finding some protection for Tua in the draft. You got to keep him healthy, man. I mean, of course, it's on Tua to protect himself too. So if the Dolphins nail the part where they find some protection, especially up front, then the Dolphins could make that splash in 2023 that they just couldn't quite land in 2022 this past season. Now we head to the City of Angels, Hollywood, baby, where it's set to host WrestleMania in just a few short weeks. But unfortunately for this team in LA, it didn't necessarily have its WrestleMania moment in 2022. And that is, of course, the Los Angeles Clippers. Oh, sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, those in LA, the Los Angeles Chargers. And unfortunately for the Chargers, well, it wasn't necessarily a WrestleMania season for them. But before we get into all that, why exactly wasn't it WrestleMania season? We got to go way back towards the end of 2021 for them. Because after another Chargers collapse that had them lose out on the last AFC wildcard spot in the last game of the 2021 season, they dedicated their offseason last year on upgrading the defense, which was the main problem for most of their games. They added the likes of corner J.C. Jackson of the Patriots at the time, linebacker Khalil Mack from the Bears via trade, and defensive tackles Sebastian Joseph Day and Austin Johnson. So they seemed like they solved their defensive problem by fortifying that defensive line alongside Joey Bosa and adding a corner like J.C. Jackson alongside opposite Asante Samuel Jr. to help mentor and guide. So, especially when you have a quarterback like Justin Herbert on offense, it seemed like the Chargers were going to take that next step and challenge the Kansas City Chiefs, be that big challenger against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in that AFC West division, which was already stacked enough, at least on paper, mind you, especially with the moves that the Broncos were making, the moves that the Raiders were making, and, well, not really much of the moves that the Chiefs were making. So the Chargers were like that one team that seemed destined to dethrone the Chiefs, at least what I thought it was. Trouble was for the Chargers going through this season. While Herbert was still efficient on offense, he had a really good season. The defense still had its trouble doing its job. Jackson really struggled on his end in coverage, and he actually got benched at one point. His season ended with a serious ankle injury, and as a result, the secondary also struggled. Asante Samuel, I mean, yeah, he had a good season, but on the opposite end, not so much. Whoever has that corner. The run defense, despite the additions with Khalil Mack, Sebastian Joseph Day, and Austin Johnson, they still had difficulty limiting running backs and continuing to allow big runs. Not to mention the fact that on the opposite end, Joey Bosa missed a good chunk of the season with a serious injury. So as a result, Justin Herbert pretty much had to carry the whole load on offense and win games basically by himself. Just keep in mind, both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, his top two receiving options, missed multiple games throughout the seasons at different points. And his only reliable weapon was running back / receiver, I guess, Austin Eckler. And they were down to their fourth receiver by the name of DeAndre Carter. So Herbert didn't really have much to work with. But, I mean, he made the most of it because he was one of the premier running quarterbacks in the league. So early in the season, the Chargers had a pretty good slate of games to start the season within the division. But unfortunately, they blew their best chance to gain an edge in the AFC West, especially in its two games against the Chiefs, because for as tight as they were, they just couldn't close out the deal, especially its Week 11 showdown at home in prime time. And they also lost a select amount of games as well that they could have definitely won because not only of their defense, but some of the coaching decisions that their head coach, Brandon Staley, made. And one of those decisions, well, yes, they ended up getting a playoff berth, was in Week 18. They knew going in, they had a playoff berth locked up thanks to the earlier game from the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals. Yet, when they were playing the Broncos, whom they were already eliminated, he elected to play his starters Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with Brandon Staley playing his starters because you want to get them tuned up, get them ready to go for playoff run. The problem I had with it, and I still have a problem with, is how long he played them. He played them for 3 quarters. Like, in a meaningless game. He didn't need to do that. And guess what happened? Justin Herbert lost his second best option, Mike Williams, to a knee injury. I think it was a knee or ankle injury. And sooner you know it, he's out for the playoff game. On the road, mind you, against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So all they had left was Keenan Allen and DeAndre Carter and Austin Eckler. That's it. But despite that, you know, the Chargers jumped out to a big 27-0 lead. And they took full advantage of Trevor Lawrence's 4 interceptions, taking full advantage of that short field. And it seemed like, you know, the Chargers were well on their way to meet the Chiefs in a playoff 3 match. But then, of course, throughout the course of time, there was always a second half of football. The Clippers gonna Clippers. And that's why we will always refer to the Chargers as the LA Clippers of football. They choked again. When the brights shine brightest, they went on to allow the Jaguars to storm back, the all-elite Jaguars, and beat them in it was a 31-30 contest. They only scored 3 points in that game. Yes, I definitely, there's some blame to go around with the offense and Herbert, but it's like Brandon Staley, it's like he couldn't coach up anything. He couldn't get any more aggressive on his own defense, but the play calling on offense was very conservative. Like, they couldn't do anything. But yet, after that big playoff choke, they decided to keep him. Like, no, let's fire the defensive coordinator. I mean, good. That was one step because they sucked. But that's not enough. Why didn't they fire Brandon Staley? Why didn't they get rid of the guy also responsible for the big choked lead in the playoffs? How the Chargers organization failed to realize he was the problem for why Mike Williams got hurt and why the Clippers clippered again is why they'll forever be the LA Clippers of football until they win somehow, some way, a championship. They're going to continue to waste Justin Herbert's prime until they do something. They gotta do something right. They gotta be this competent, right? Hopefully, but we'll see. So anyway, at least so far in the offseason, you know, they didn't have that much cap space to work with. I mean, $19 million, not really much money to spend, especially when they lost linebacker Drew Tranquil to another team, and they didn't really do much. They haven't really done too much so far. Their only big signing so far has been linebacker Eric Kendricks from the Minnesota Vikings. So at least it should help a little bit with the run defense, I guess. But I guess they're waiting for the draft. They're waiting for the draft to address their big moves. But the big headline, though, for the Chargers is running back Austin Eckler requesting a trade. I'm like, damn, what happened? I guess the money, like he's eligible for contract extension, but it's like, what happened? Like, why all of a sudden he wants to trade out? So the Chargers seem fine with him seeking it, and yeah, I guess they're gonna move on with a different running back, whether it's this season or next season. Like, damn. So obviously, still some work for the Chargers to do. Like I said, just adjust the run defense. You really got to get some defensive tackle, especially get some defensive tackles in the draft. I guess Sebastian Joseph Day and Austin Johnson aren't just not enough. You got to at least add some depth in that defensive line. Get some run stoppers in there, man, and find a safety that can be paired with Derwin James, and just get some help in the secondary, man, and get some depth behind J.C. Jackson. Hopefully he can stay healthy, and Asante Samuel Jr. So for the Chargers, obviously a disappointing end to their 2022 season, choking away that lead like the Clippers always do. But yeah, even with the little amount of money and draft capital this offseason, they need to use every bit of it to invest in a defense that just can't stop anything. Otherwise, they're going to keep wasting more prime years of Justin Herbert because eventually Justin Herbert's patience is going to run out in that organization. And if that patience runs in, well, the Clippers are going to keep clippering on, man. They're going to have their Clipper mania running wild forever and ever. Amen. So now we're going to head to a flock, the Ravens flock, and talk about the Baltimore Ravens. For the Ravens, they were looking to bounce back after 2021 where they seemed poised to make a run at the AFC North title, but they suffered a string of late season injuries, a lot of bad luck, including to their starting quarterback, Lamar Jackson. They lost their last 6 games all December long. They went 8-9 and were dead last in the division. So a lot of bad injury luck if you look back at that 2021 season, if you're a Ravens fan. But even with the bad ending to their season, when you looked back at their last offseason, they didn't really do a whole lot to fix those issues that plagued them. But actually, when they actually did a little bit worse, they did a little bit of the opposite of getting better. They traded away their top receiver, Marquise Hollywood-Brown, to the Cardinals, and because I guess he was looking for a contract extension, but instead they traded him away to Arizona. But then they didn't get his replacement, because especially to complement Rashad Bateman, their then rookie receiver. So they were going into a season where they didn't really have a top receiving option, let alone a receiver too. So yeah, they addressed a few parts of the defense, like very few. But the problem was the Ravens left Lamar Jackson, who was going into a contract year, mind you. He was on his 5th-year option, so going into this year's offseason, he was going to be a free agent. Like, until, obviously, we'll talk about it in just a bit. The Ravens were leaving Lamar Jackson with pretty much nothing on offense, except for 2 big pieces. But even then, when you go into this regular season for the Ravens, Jackson played like he had something to prove to get that next big fat contract, throwing on target to his main receivers, Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman, and getting role players involved too, like Devin Duvernay and running back J.K. Dobbins. And, of course, he used his legs to get first downs, get touchdowns, and make some big plays of his own. So Lamar Jackson was definitely playing like a man out to prove something, getting that big money. But for the Ravens, early on in the season, and this became a troubling trend for them in a few other games late in the season too, they couldn't close out games, especially early in the season, because once they jumped to a big lead, they established their dominance, they got too conservative. And a lot of that had to do with their coach, John Harbaugh, and offensive coordinator, Greg Roman. The play calling, we'll get to that in a bit, was pretty bad, especially like in the middle portion of the season. But yeah, like once they got up to a big lead, they eventually lose it because of how conservative they were, and yeah, they choked a lot. Sure, they resolved that issue to a little degree. Like I said, the play calling was bad. It was a very stagnant offense, which was very reliant on Jackson's rushing ability. And, well, part of that was due to season-ending injuries to receiver Rashad Bateman and Devin Duvernay in Week 8. So, pretty much you had no receivers, like, after that point. So, reliance on Lamar Jackson's rushing ability became even more apparent. And your only reliable target consistently was tight end Mark Andrews. So, yeah, the Ravens couldn't scratch the surface, whether it is before then and after then, with scoring more than 20 points a week. But despite those issues, the Ravens managed to hold onto the AFC North Division lead for most of the season until Lamar Jackson suffered a knee injury in Week 13. So he was injured again. And while it was initially supposed to keep him out a few weeks, but it ended up keeping him out the rest of the season. So a definite big blow to the Ravens' chances at competing not just for the division, but potentially going deeper into the postseason if they were even going to go that far. So instead, once again, Tyler Huntley, their backup, had to play in place of Lamar Jackson. But unlike last year where he had that surprise run of games, Tyler Huntley played worse than the year before, mainly due to the limited supporting cast that he had. Unlike last year where he had Marquise Brown, Andrews, and Rashad Bateman, he had nobody. He had nobody other than Mark Andrews. And Mark Andrews recovered a good amount of the time this year. And, of course, the play calling issues with Greg Roman, their offensive coordinator. So the Ravens would lose their last 3 or 4 games, and sure, they got a wild card berth. But because of the weird modified playoff format due to the canceled Bills-Bengals game, they had an opportunity to get a home playoff game on a coin flip, despite being a wild card team. But they lost the last game of the season to the Bengals, so that was rendered useless. So they met the Bengals again in an immediate 3 match in the AFC wildcard game, and somehow, some way, they actually managed to keep pace with Cincinnati in that game, especially defensively. And they were almost close to beating them. That was until an ill-fated decision to have Tyler Huntley jump the goal line, and he fumbled it. And Sam Hubbard recovered it for a very long touchdown and changed the game and eventually sent the Ravens home. So, yeah, they recovered from an 8-9 finish in 2021. They ended the season 10-7 this past season and got a playoff berth out of it. It was still a very disappointing season, in my opinion, for Baltimore because they lost Lamar Jackson again due to injury, and the whole offense, whether it was with Jackson or Huntley, it was just very, very middling, completely lacking in firepower. Especially, it was made worse with the injuries to Bateman and Duvernay, and he was just too over-reliant on the rushing ability of whoever was at quarterback. They didn't even try to bother with some of their running backs, like at least balancing it out with J.K. Dobbins. So, at least for the Ravens, though, they made a first good step right after the season ended by firing Greg Roman, and replacing him at the offensive coordinator position is Todd Monken, who was the offensive coordinator for Georgia Bulldogs team that had just won the national championship at the time. So for the Ravens, they obviously got a lot of questions to answer this offseason. This offseason that is still ongoing. But of course, the biggest question for Baltimore is, what are they going to do with Lamar Jackson? Because obviously they already made the big move to place the non-exclusive franchise tag. What does that mean? Well, if it was the exclusive franchise tag, then Lamar Jackson is pretty much tied to them for this amount of money for 1 year. But since they placed the non-exclusive franchise tag, he could talk to other teams, or teams can come to to Jackson and the Ravens and offer him a deal, and see if the Ravens want to match it. And if they don't want to match it, then in return of getting Lamar Jackson, they have to give up 2 first-round picks. Now, we'll see if any team wants to buy it at this point. But at this point, it's like most teams that are quarterback needy settle on their quarterback, like the Raiders, the Commanders, the Falcons. I don't know what other team needs a quarterback at this point, aside from the ones that are already focusing so much on the draft. So at this point, if you're Lamar Jackson, who's kind of representing himself at this point, he doesn't have an agent. Do you take the franchise tag, or do you go back to the negotiating table with Baltimore and try to come up with something long term? I don't know. Either way, neither team is at a good position right now in terms of a long term deal. So some other things that the Ravens have to do this offseason is that, well, if Lamar Jackson doesn't want to play under that non-exclusive franchise tag, they got to find another quarterback option behind Tyler Huntley, because obviously he didn't play that well in 2022. So if they're not going to get Lamar Jackson back under that franchise tag, might as well get a placeholder option behind Tyler Huntley. And then you have to find 2, if not 3, receiving options opposite Rashad Bateman, because they need a top receiver. Like they have a first round pick to get one, right? Use that pick to go and get a receiving option opposite Bateman, and then use at least a couple of your late round picks to go get more receivers, because whoever's going to be at quarterback definitely needs options, not just Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman. And then bolster the defense, starting with the secondary, because it picked up late in the season, but it can definitely be worked on. So for the Ravens in 2022, they were supposed to bounce back, but they didn't do enough in the previous offseason to make that happen. Yes, they had injuries on offense again, but even then, they were mediocre on the offensive side of the ball, despite some good play from Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews. But now, when you're focusing on this offseason, with Lamar in this war against himself to get a contract that he wants over the non-exclusive franchise tag, the Ravens look destined to keep middling with the same cycle of mediocrity again this fall, until they can come to a reasonable agreement with their supposed franchise quarterback. And until they do, things are not looking great in the flock. So the last team we're going to be talking about in our wild card edition of NFL Season Recap Month, Part 4, is the team that won the NFC North, but unfortunately, when it came to nut-busting time, they couldn't raise the skull, and that is the Minnesota Vikings. So the Vikings in 2022 were reigning in a new regime. Head coach general manager duo Ken O'Connell and Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. That's the 2 names that were coming in and ringing the bell in 2022 as that new duo. Mike Zimmer finally out the window, along with Rick Spielman, to some people's surprise. But it was a new era for Vikings football. So that duo addressed a little bit of their needs last offseason on the defensive side of the ball, and hoped that an offensive coach in Kevin O'Connell would ignite some better play out of quarterback Kirk Cousins. At least in 2022, when you talk about the regular season, good news for Vikings fans, Kirk had another productive season, in which, despite having his usual Captain Kirk checkdown moments, Kevin O'Connell challenged him of taking more aggressive shots downfield, trying to thread the needle in some sort of way in that offense. And he actually did. Kirk accepted that challenge and in at least some ways succeeded. And as a result, Justin Jefferson had his best season yet in his 3rd year, leading all receivers in receiving yards and receptions, and was the offensive player of the year. He was the key component in all the Vikings wins, alongside running back Dalvin Cook, second receiver Adam Thielen, and later addition tight end TJ Hawkinson. Unfortunately for the Vikings, here's where the bad news comes in. That offense did so well only because they were in a spot to do such. Why? Because of their nearly dead last defense. A passing defense that couldn't stop opposing receivers on both big and small plays, the inability to rush the quarterback or gain any pressure on the quarterback, and gave up a lot of points and put the Vikings in huge holes, whether it was single digit or double digit or maybe even triple digits deficits early and often. A large majority of these Vikings wins that happened in 2022 were either comeback wins or very close games. But you saw a troubling trend in just week 2 of that season against the Philadelphia Eagles, where you notice that when it came to the bright lights, this team shrunk against legitimate competition. Now, sure, you could say this offense would come to light. It would immediately come clutch against teams like the Lions, the Saints, and especially the Colts. And hell, I would say even the Bills. However, when they face legitimate competition like the Philadelphia Eagles, the Dallas Cowboys, the Lions a second time, and the Packers a second time, their flaws defensively, and I could say even a little bit offensively too, they were pretty bad. They're pretty bad. Especially one of those big flaws was on the offensive line. It was one of the worst in the league. Kirk Cousins got sacked a lot. And sometimes Kirk Cousins couldn't process the field properly. But I guess where we can give the Vikings some credit, it was their 2 big wins and their 2 statement wins of the season, in which they found a way to stun the Bills in Week 10 and complete the largest comeback in NFL history. 33-0. I mean, yeah, it was against the choking Colts, but I mean, hey, you're in the history books, and they clinched the NFC North division title in that same game. So I remember I was watching that. I was at work, and it was like 32-0. Well, shit, this game's gonna be over. And then all of a sudden, like a couple hours later, it's like, wait, what the hell? How did the Vikings catch up in this game? So, yeah, at least for the Vikings, 2 big wins in that season. That being said, though, when it came to their playoff game against the Giants, their deficiencies were on display big time, especially on defense. Again, their inability to contain Daniel Jones on the run, mind you. The inability to stop any of their receivers. And the Vikings' own offense were capped on their opportunities. Minnesota, unsurprisingly, lost in the first round. And, yeah, it was not exactly I don't know if you can say a successful season for the Vikings because, well, yeah, they won 13 games. The problem is they won with a lot of luck. It was a lot of luck for the Vikings to win those games in very close fashion. Had that luck not been there, they would have been a middling team. Really. So, for the Vikings, there are a lot of questions to answer this offseason. They have to focus on the defensive side of the ball, which so far, they kind of have been doing, but not really. So far, looking at this offseason, they have released corners, Byron Murphy. They signed corners Byron Murphy and Cameron Dantzler. Byron Murphy should be a solid corner addition in a secondary, which has been frequently torched. And adding to the pass rush is former Saints defensive end Marcus Davenport. So getting some help in that defense, which is very much needed with Aaron Smith. So definitely needed for the Vikings. However, some odd reason they released linebacker Zadarius Smith for reasons why he wanted to opt out of the Vikings. I don't know. They also released receiver Adam Thielen for cap reasons. So Adam Thielen, for the first time in 9 seasons, will be playing on a different team. And then they re-signed running back Alexander Madison and center Garrett Bradbury. So 2 key pieces on that offense in terms of Madison, a key backup for them. But the work shouldn't stop there, despite, the negative money that they have right now, the limited draft capital that they have. The Vikings obviously got to address the defense with the resources that they have. They need more help at corner. They need more help at linebacker. They need to address that interior defensive line because, yeah, they already fired their defensive coordinator, really immediately after the season ended. But the work shouldn't stop there. They already got their new defensive coordinator, but they need to get a lot more help adding depth at these key positions, corner, linebacker, and interior defensive line. Because this for as important as the offense is in this game, I mean, of course, you don't want to be stuck in a position where you're going to be one of the worst defenses again. And then now with Adam Thielen gone, well, you want to find another receiver opposite Justin Jefferson. Yeah, you have KJ Osborne, but of course, you want to have another receiving option. So Osborne and Jefferson don't get tangled up and double or triple teamed by other options on the opposite end of the field. So getting another receiving option for Kirk Cousins is kind of a priority for them. So despite going 13-4 and winning the division, in my opinion, not exactly an accomplishment for the Minnesota Vikings because, like I said, they won a lot of close games with a lot of luck. And as such, they were a very fraudulent playoff team because when they came to nut-busting time against legitimate competition, not to say that the Giants are a legitimate playoff team in 2022, but when it came to the bright lights against actual teams, they got their asses whooped. And they no-showed in that game against the Giants because, well, mostly due to their inability to play overall defense. So this rest of the offseason, they have to fix that problem. They already got a decent start on that, but they're going to have to do a lot more in the NFL draft next month. They do that, and they can avoid the disastrous defense and maybe stack up a little bit more legitimate wins in 2023, especially considering that the NFC North, with Aaron Rodgers potentially on his way out, but the Detroit Lions on the rise, and potentially the Bears slowly but surely creeping their way up. Be careful, Vikings. This division could be a little bit treacherous than you might imagine. And with that is the end of part 4 of our 2022 NFL season recaps. What did you all think of these 6 teams that we talked about today? We talked about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Seattle Seahawks, the LA Chargers, the Miami Dolphins, the Baltimore Ravens, and the Minnesota Vikings. The 6 wildcard teams that fell short of their Super Bowl dreams and were one and done in the playoffs. So let me know your thoughts, whether you're a fan of these teams or not. I'd like to know your thoughts on all 6 of these teams that we talked about in part 4 of our season recaps and what they need to do for the rest of this offseason to potentially make their ultimate goal of potentially trying to get deeper into the playoffs or maybe make a surprise run at the Super Bowl. I'd like to know your thoughts. And also, let me know your thoughts on NFL free agency so far and this whole offseason as well. But anyway, that is it for me on Very Cold Lasagna. I am your host, DylanLasagna, bringing you another round of Filthy Casual takes in this filthy casual place. Anyway, until next time, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of sports. And until next time, peace out.